This podcast is brought to you by Ironsight. The logistical complexity of oil and gas field operations can make it difficult to stay on top of who is doing what, where, and when. That's where Ironsight comes in. And so Ironsight connects E&Ps, midstream companies, and service providers so they can collaborate and coordinate with the field services and internal resources more efficiently. Ironsight was designed to support everything from fluid hauling and hotshots to maintenance and trades, making it one of the most versatile field operations and logistics management tools on the market. How do they do it? Well, the secret sauce is, regardless of what type of service, every single job you need done is going to follow the same core workflow. Somebody requests a job, it gets scheduled, the job gets executed, what gets done is documented, and it's reviewed, approved, and the data and the documentation gets sent wherever it needs to go kind of from there. So Ironsight has spent years perfecting their fit-for-purpose function, making their core workflow configurable to any field activity so that you can lower operating costs, reduce your risk, and be more effective across your entire field operation. So whether you work for an E&P, midstream company, or service provider, if you're managing field operations and logistics, you're going to want to take a look at Ironsight. They were also the Energy Tech Night Midland winner a few years back. They've also been on the podcast in the past, good friends of ours. So go check them out. Visit ironsight.app/DW to learn if your company is eligible for a free 3-month trial. It's Ironsight, SIGHT.app/DW. Click the link in the description and let them know that we sent you.
What's going on, Digital Wildcatters? Welcome to another episode of the Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. Got a really interesting topic this week. We are talking about helium, and there's probably a lot of people that are listening that are familiar with helium.
Everybody's first thought is like sucking the helium out of balloons, making your voice really high.
Yeah. But there's actually a ton of scientific and engineering applications for helium, and the oil and gas and natural resources industry plays a big role in this. So today we have Robert Price, the CEO of Total Helium, in the studio today, down here from Denver.
Yeah.
I asked Robert, I said, did you come in town for OTC? He's like, no, I just came in town for this podcast. Y'all are that special. So appreciate you coming down here, man.
Well, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. And as I shared with you, a lot of our team members are big fans of you, being in the oil and gas business for, many decades. And the younger generation that's coming in, they love you. And when they said, you got to go on this podcast, you got to. So it's an honor to be here.
That's awesome.
Really happy to be here.
No, appreciate you taking the time to come tell your story and talk about what you guys are working on. So first, let's talk about Total Helium, just at a high level overview. What is it? I can say it's a helium E&P. You take it from there.
Yeah. Thanks, Colin. So I funded Total Helium about 3 years ago. We acquired oil and gas leases in Kansas. And because of my limited funding of acquiring over 50, 60, 70,000 acres in Kansas, and our concept was to drill wells, a dewatering process where we bring the pressure down and the gas expands. The Hugoton Basin has been the epicenter of helium production for the last 100 years. Much of the world's supply of helium has come from the Hugoton. Mm-hmm. So we went where the helium was. And as we did this process, we discovered helium, but the quantity of helium was about 0.6%. Yeah. So in order for you to produce a lot, you need a lot of quantity to have the that 0.6% really profitable.
Mm-hmm. I wrote this Twitter thread a while back talking about helium, because we've been in a helium shortage for I don't even know how many years, but the issue, and excuse me if I'm off base here, if I'm wrong, I'm not an expert when it comes to helium production, but from my understanding is that helium production for the most part has kind of been a byproduct of natural gas production. Pioneer Natural Resources used to be a pretty big producer of helium and some of their assets. And Jake mentioned, when people think of helium, they think of going to the store, and everyone knows you go to the store and you can't get balloons filled recently just because of helium shortages. But there's so many applications within scientific laboratories, within engineering and computer hardware and things of this nature. How many companies are out there that focus on, hey, we're a helium production company? I mean, is there hundreds of them? Is it you and a few others? What's the market?
It is emerging, and the people that are exploring for it obviously they have oil and gas experience. So they have all these skills to be able to get the leases, drill the wells, and produce it. Back to mention about Pioneer and other ones that were in the helium business, it is a byproduct, generally speaking, less than 1%. So in the Hugoton Basin, the United States government, Bureau of Land Management, they acknowledged that helium was a strategic asset, back in World War I, where you could send up balloons and possibly bomb your adversaries.
Yeah.
And so they started the helium reserve, where they stored helium. Since then, Congress said, hey, get out of the helium business, shut it down. So it's being shut down. So that is a void in the overall helium markets domestically. Where's the other supplies coming from? They're coming from either Russia or Qatar. And those two supplies are geopolitically not that positive for us here in the United States.
Yeah.
So
along with the rest of the energy supply chain, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So so there is a real need to have a guaranteed on-demand supply of helium. So I partnered with Linde. Linde is a $170 billion market cap company. They actually funded our lease acquisition and our drilling of our wells in Kansas. And so Linde also, we worked with them to try to find other projects. And what I'm really excited about today, Colin and Jake, is just on Monday, we closed on a major acquisition for our company, our small company, buying an asset in Arizona. So where you have in Kansas and Qatar and Russia, sometimes 1/10 of 1% is the byproduct. Some people refer to this part of Arizona, the Saudi Arabia of helium.
Really?
And what? Go ahead.
That's interesting. So there's this mass reserve of helium in Arizona, people think?
Well, the answer is yes, and it's already been proven, and there's been a lot of production coming out of Arizona. There are certain geological conditions that the helium concentrations are anywhere from 5 to 8%. And so we just acquired a field. We have producing assets on 2 wells. We have another 5 wells that have been drilled. Again, Linde is our partner, and Linde helped fund the pipeline expansion. And so we're building the pipeline right now to hook up these 5 wells. We have another 6 wells that we'll be completing within the next month. And so we will have upward to 14 wells, and we have a very aggressive drilling program. It's more developmental drilling. I wouldn't call it the Permian type of developmental drilling, but we have blanket sands. We have other sand channels that meander, which the wells could be a lot better than the base sands.
Yeah.
And so it is so exciting.
So I want to dive into the operations of helium drilling and production here in a bit.
Yeah.
There's like 5 questions right off the top of my head, especially about Arizona. But before we do that, let's dive into your background real quick so that we can give some people some context, because they could be listening and be like, oh, this guy's crazy and full of shit and doesn't know anything about drilling wells. But I mean, you have a long tenured history in oil and gas. So tell us your story from the point of inception. How'd you get in the energy
I'll try to, as my 8-year-old son says when I put him to bed at night, I said, tell me about your day. And he said, I woke up. So I'm not going to be that granular, Colin, but anyway, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, went to undergrad at University of Colorado, and ended up in law school at University of Tulsa, and I specialized in energy law. My first job out of law school, I worked at a bank. Tulsa we used to call ourselves the oil capital of the world. There was a lot of major oil and gas companies that had assets and companies in Tulsa. And so I managed our trust customers' oil and gas assets. And that was really where I learned much about the oil and gas business. We had minerals, royalties, working interests. After I did that, I started a mom and pop exploration company. We called it Poor Man's Oil. We were drilling 2,000-foot wells.
Yeah.
And we were finding 100,000 barrels here, 100,000 barrels there.
Nice.
And we were able to, eke out a living to the next deals.
Yeah.
We then had a very ambitious project in the Williston Basin. We had 125,000 acres. We were doing trilaterals funded by Halliburton. Halliburton was our joint venture partner. This was in the mid-90s. And we had all the leases. But with the deduct, the price went down to about $12 a barrel. Yeah. We didn't know what to do with the leases. There was a play in the Red River called the Continental Resources and in Burlington, Conoco's predecessor. They were drilling these trilaterals before hydraulic fracking. And so we drilled 3 technical success wells, economic failures, and our leases expired. And guess where our leases were? They were at the core of the Bakken. We still had a little residual interest. So let me say, what I've learned in life is you make sure you have longer term leases. And so we went to Kansas. I got longer term leases, 5-year leases, right to renew for 5 and another 5 years. So you learn along the way. And so, but I've been in manufacturing too. I had S&R Compression, still around today. We made well site compressors. I sold that business to buy a manufacturing company, and I supplied all of Ford Motor Company's North American automotive glass with our plant in Tulsa, Nashville, Maquiladora in Juarez. And we had a really robust aftermarket company too, but my heart has always been in oil and gas. And even though I've been diversified in different businesses, I had a publicly traded company called Highlands Natural Resources. We drilled 2-mile laterals with a ConocoPhillips farm out in the DJ Basin. We actually extended the field further south than any other companies. We are funded by private equity, Sigler Guff. We were funded by, again, my old partner Halliburton that funded our 2-mile laterals. And then we ended up selling it to a family in Wyoming called the True Family.
Okay.
So we developed it.
True Oil family?
Yeah, True Oil. They're I can't say better things about the family and the company. And so, but I learned along the way. And helium, I was so fascinated with. And our transaction in Arizona, we are paid $500 an MCF. And if you have less than 1%, depending on what your quantity is, it doesn't necessarily add up. But when you have 5 to 8% at $500 an MCF, it is very significant. And the numbers on our field in Arizona are truly extraordinary. We're going to be able to drill up to 150 wells. And again, a blanket sand, well after well after well, as we develop this field. As I mentioned before, Linde funded our pipeline expansion. We have the agreement with Linde to sell for $500 an MCF on the first 10 wells. And the market for helium right now, and there's, as you guys being in the oil and gas industry, you know the ebbs and flows of the prices up and down. We chose to not lock our price in for the long term because we're seeing current pricing at helium between $500 and $1,000 an MCF.
Yeah.
So our commitment is just on the first 10 wells.
Yeah. So these wells in Arizona, first, let's talk about what the wells look like. Are these shallow 2,000, 3,000 foot wells? Are they deep wells? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the formation we're in, it's called the Shinnerup. It's between 700 and 1,200 feet deep.
Okay.
We have partnered with a gentleman named Brad Butler, actually from Dallas. He has found helium in Colorado and Arizona. He is truly a helium finder. Linde put us together. We are public. Brad generally does not have partners in his companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so we purchased a 50% interest in it. Brad's background is he's a driller. He has a drilling rig. So let me just back up about the Holbrook Basin, first of all, okay? You have all these rocks, and they weren't deep enough to be cooked. So it's not an oil and gas basin. It's a helium, nitrogen, CO2 basin.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And so if you try to get services and you try to get Halliburton in from, another basin to come in and cement your wells, very expensive. So what did Brad do? He has his own drilling rig, first of all. Second of all, he went to an auction in Texas and bought a cementing truck. So he has his own trenching equipment. So when Lindy funded our pipeline expansion, we're trenching it ourselves. And Brad is out there right now doing it, hooking our new wells online.
That's pretty cool.
Very, very simple drilling. And just to share what we do, we drill down, and Brad is, again, these wells take about 2 or 3 days. They, depending on where they are, whether they're in the blanket sand or whether in the sand channel, the IPs can be anywhere from 150 MCF a day up to 1,000 MCF a day.
Okay.
And you just do the math really quick. Take 8% of 150 MCF a day, times it by $500 an MCF. These wells pay out. They cost $220,000 to drill. They pay out in about 3 months. That's on the blanket sand. The sand channel, which we're going to hit several of those, will pay out within about a month.
So I love talking about the operations side of it, because I mean, even if you go work in some oil and gas fields, I mean, it's hard to get crews and service rigs and things of that nature. So I love that you talked about in Arizona, it's like there's no infrastructure at all. The closest thing would be coming from, Colorado or Bakersfield or East New Mexico. And, none of those places are necessarily close or economic to get equipment down there. And so that presents a challenge.
Yes.
Just from the operations and service side, then, pipeline infrastructure and things of that nature. On the pipelines, you were talking about pricing. Natural gas market is pretty fluid and accurately priced by basin. I imagine helium isn't as much. I bet that there's a lot more, dislocation in the market. And like with these pipelines, where are you actually sending it to? Where are you tying in? And
you said Lindy's buying it, right?
Yeah, they are. And when I first got in the helium business several years ago, I had to look up a word. It was called opaque. I said, what does opaque mean? It means just very untransparent. You don't really know what the market is. There's no real index for what the helium is.
Yeah.
And what they call them, these industrial gas companies, there's Linde, Air Products, Air Liquide, a couple other 2 minor ones, they control it. So they actually do long-term contracts with many of the producers, and they do not advertise what the price is. And because it's such a limited commodity, you really don't know what the price is.
Yeah.
And so it is a direct negotiation with the industrial gas company.
Got you.
Back to your question before, Colin, about the different uses of helium.
Yeah.
And of course, we have a helium tank in our office with helium balloons. And when anyone of our neighbors have kids parties, or they can't get it at Party City or something else, we got the helium for it. So
that's pretty cool.
We embrace the balloon.
It's a funny, just kind of like quirky thing to give back to the community. Yeah. It's like, hey, we're the helium plug. You come out with a trench coat. It's like, how much helium do you need?
Yeah, that's it.
I love it.
So, but the uses, MRI machines need helium, cooling properties. The space program, helium is very important from the purging element of it. And then semiconductor manufacturing.
Yeah.
If you can imagine, with the CHIPS Act, which just passed, $50 billion going into bringing chip manufacturing here in the United States. So the U.S., and I look at it with my background in oil and gas. I mean, what did we say back then? I'm a kid of the 70s, okay? I remember getting in line to get gas when there was an oil embargo in the Middle East.
Yeah.
We had to do every other day. And so it was about becoming independent from foreign supplies of oil and gas. And we have achieved it as a nation, which is incredible feat based on, the working men and women of the oil and gas industry and the entrepreneurs out there. And what you guys are doing, you're getting the word out, and it really helps us become more independent. Helium is the same way. We have semiconductor manufacturers that want to build their plants here. Can you imagine them going to either Linde, Air Products, or someone else and say, hey, we want to sign a long-term contract with you? And you respond, well, yeah, we'll sign the long-term contract. We're going to get it from Russia. They're going to go, I don't think so. So there is a real need. You're spending these billions of dollars. You have to have that helium, that domestic supply of helium on demand, ready to go. And so one of the initiatives we're working on with Linde is a 50-50 partnership for a helium storage. So we can have that on-demand helium.
This podcast is brought to you by EnergyX. Are you tired of paying huge rates to the big cloud providers? Are you worried about being booted off a cloud platform if your company doesn't meet their ever-shifting standards? Ready to step up your data security and disaster recovery game? Well, ladies and gentlemen, your new cloud is ready. Introducing xCloud, the scalable, resilient computing cloud that is also actually affordable. It's high-performance compute for half the cost. HPC for HTC. xCloud from Red Team is opening a beta program for new cloud computing customers, and that means you, my friend. The xCloud is powered by the XMDC immersion-cooled modular data center from EnergyX. I've seen this data center in operation, and it is a total game changer. So if you want more information about the beta launch, go to the URL in the description. Type in promo code BETA, BETA, for 50% off of your first instance. And so the URL is going to be digitalwildcatters.com/EnergyX.
How do you store helium? Because I know with like LNG, it's got to be like those little circular bulbs, and obviously oil can just be in massive tanks. Like,
Yeah.
How do you store helium?
That's such a good question, Jake, because helium, I mean, hydrogen is the number one element, and then helium. It is such a sneaky molecule. I mean, it wants to get the heck out of here. It wouldn't be a product, a byproduct, Colin, if it weren't so small and it didn't kind of want to run to the atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's so hard to trap helium. And so tell me your question one more time, Jake.
How do you store helium?
How do you store it? Okay. So it'll literally, if you have it in a tank of steel, it's going to get out eventually. That's how sneaky this element is.
Is it just super tiny molecules that are able just to escape through anything?
It just wants to get the heck out. And so on geological time, to be able to trap it, it is very difficult. I want to just share one little from a geological standpoint.
Yeah.
There are some people that use soil samples in exploration. Personally, I haven't been a big fan of them, but there has been some natural gas fields that have been discovered on soil sampling. So if it works with oil and gas, can you only imagine what it will do for helium? And so we have a soil sample survey, even though we have this blanket sand, to be able to get one of those wells that will pay, I mean, literally within months, we'll make $1 million in revenue in the sand channel. So what we're doing, we're drilling all these blanket wells, but we're doing the soil sample to get in the channels to actually increase our odds and really increase the revenue. But so back to your question, Jake, about storage. So it was a traditional storage system that the BLM had. It was very inefficient, didn't operate well, and it likes to sneak out. So what we're doing in Kansas is we're doing a desalination project with salts to put fresh water in, and it's very the high integrity within this, and it's in the infrastructure where a lot of the helium plants are. So, Colin, I think this was one of your questions about the pipeline and the processing. Just real quick, if you have a helium with a lot of methane and other liquids involved in it, it's a very expensive processing plant. However, where we are, it's 5 to 8% helium, and the rest is nitrogen. So it's a real simple process where you have a pressure swing absorption unit that just takes the nitrogen out. What do you do with the nitrogen? You vent in the atmosphere. And so, but we process it to 99.9% helium in a gaseous state. Some of these applications wants it in a liquid state. So at that point, then it's shipped to a plant. Linde has a plant in Kansas, and then it's liquefied and then distributed thereafter.
I was just looking at a I want to link you up with someone, Brent at Firefly. They've developed this underground storage technology called Gas Loop. I was just looking at their website real quick because I know off the top of my head it's for nat gas and hydrogen.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Anyways, regardless, you guys would have a great conversation. But he came up to mind when we were talking about this because I think the storage component is super interesting. And we talk, you're talking about energy independence and really, it's not just an energy independence thing. It's a independence and diversification of supply chains across energy, across technology. I was at a small little conference last week with Oracle and NVIDIA, and you look at what's happening with machine learning and artificial intelligence and the amount of compute that is coming online. It's almost insatiable. And it's very hard to wrap your head around what is needed to continue growing the tech industry from a physical hardware perspective. And, you're just talking about what we need for semiconductors and things of this nature. And I think that there is this massive movement towards onshoring of manufacturing. It's coming back to North America, specifically places like Texas and Mexico. And I think that you're going to see a lot of manufacturing start co-locating with energy assets. But I didn't think about it from a helium perspective of, hey, we'll build semiconductors in the US, but we want to know that we have a guaranteed supply of.
Wait a second. Didn't Panasonic build like a multi-billion-dollar facility in Kansas for semiconductors?
Yeah, it's actually a battery plant.
It's a battery plant.
Okay. Battery plant there. But it's one of the biggest economic booms that Kansas has had.
Well, and you're seeing a lot of those things from the IRA bill where, they're coming in and building these massive facilities, which I love to see.
Yeah.
Like, America just needs to get back to being a country building shit, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I didn't think this is definitely going to open up Pandora's box of how I'm thinking, because I didn't think about helium supply. But I love how you said you got to look up the term opaque, because that's what I was getting at. I was like, there just doesn't seem to be like a clear market for, hey, what is the price of helium? But it makes perfect sense that these large corporations, they have the contracts and they partner up with producers to buy it.
Yeah.
I think that, you probably see the same thing in the LNG space where it's like, hey, we'll go partner up or we'll own the upstream asset, and, you're getting, whatever the price may be, your break even of $1 MCF or whatever, and then there's a big arb there for your product. But that I think that all of that is super interesting and probably has, it's going to evolve a lot over the next 10 to 15 years as more companies look to manufacture in the United States.
Yeah, those are all spot on, Colin. About the supply chain and how we're trying to participate in the supply chain and the pricing. And again, that's the question. There's there's not the hedging of helium necessarily. There's not the instruments out there for hedging helium. And so what we're doing is we're balancing with the $500 an MCF for X amount of wells. We're keeping our options open. So it's kind of an indirect hedge to lock some of it in at 500 and then do the spot market. Lindy's been a really good partner of ours.
Yeah.
And we hope to sell this additional helium to them or through them. But there are other avenues selling directly to some of the end users.
Got you. The field in Arizona, what part of the state is it located in? And I've never been to Arizona, so I'm not familiar with the state, but
I've just driven through once.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you guys now have an official invitation to come.
Would love to.
It's fascinating. We my business partners and board members came down to do the due diligence a couple months ago on this acquisition, and we went around in Brad Butler's truck, and we opened up each one of the wells, went to the processing plant, saw the Lindy trailers being shipped off, but it's right next to it's in the Four Corners area on the eastern side of Arizona. On the left, we have 27,000 acres. We're getting additional acreage as well. On the left side is a petrified forest. And just fascinating to see this petrified wood all over the place. On the on the right side, or the eastern side, is the Navajo Reservation. And there has been some traditional helium production coming out of the Navajo Reservation.
Okay.
And there's challenges. You will never drill in the petrified forest. There are some challenges on the Navajo. And so we have this nice little 27,000 acre slice where we can develop these wells. We have permission to drill on 40 acre. And we've brought in some really good consultants. One consultant we're working with his name is Nick Steinberger. He was with George Mitchell, and he was one of the lead teams that discovered this hydraulic fracking.
Cool.
And so Nick has incredible expertise. Brad Butler has from a fracking standpoint and completion standpoint, Brad Butler has the operational expertise, and we put them together. And so, we don't know if it's going to be on density of 40 acres, could be. But right now, all of our economics are done on drilling one every 160 acres, which still gets us over 150 wells. And anyway, so
I got a question about from the geologic perspective, and you may know this, you may not know it, but I'm going to ask it anyways. How does helium originate? You made a comment earlier. It's like, hey, look, this exists in shallow reservoirs, not too deep to where it gets cooked.
Yeah.
But, I'm listening to you talk and you say, hey, it's found in Arizona, it's found in Kansas. And so, obviously Kansas has oil and gas production, Arizona doesn't. And so I'm like really curious how did helium originate in Arizona?
Yeah, it's a chemical process deep in the earth through degradation of thorium and other minerals that causes the helium to generate.
Got you. Okay. I'm gonna have to go look into that more because I'm curious. So it's like, you have these two relatively random places where it seemed to generate, and where else could it be in the United States and throughout North
on top of that, how do you guys know where there is helium geologically? Is it going out and getting core samples? Is it running seismic?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, fortunate because of the oil and gas industry, there's been a lot of test wells that have been drilled in many different basins. And early on, they thought maybe the Holbrook Basin of Arizona, might be a petroleum producing field. And all they got was helium and nitrogen and CO2. And so just the same geological conditions. The key is trapping. In geological time, that helium molecule is just going to escape to the atmosphere.
Is there anything different that you guys are actually doing in the well to trap that from the formation? Or does it look just like an oil and gas well?
Yeah. So just pretty much just like an oil and gas well, what we're doing with these shallow wells, Jake, is we drill down right above the formation. We set the pipe, and then we do an open hole completion. And so we acidize and frack on the tighter ones. Channel wells, the ones that will produce $1 million within a few months, no completion on those. It's just pretty much natural, maybe a little bit of acid in it.
Do you know how much pressure those have?
Not much
when they come online.
Not much. They're 100, 200 pounds psi. We put them in a compressor, and it flows. So they're not high pressure.
Yeah.
What's
thought? I don't know what the pressure is on a typical helium tank, but you can just take hits right off the well.
Oh yeah, right. What another exciting component of our 27,000 acres, we have 3 deep-seated structures, which could be very significant. But what's interesting, when you say deep-seated structures in the Holbrook Basin, it's 3,800 feet.
Yeah.
So as we're doing these developmental wells and drill it down, we'll just set some casing over it, and then we'll go down and test these deep-seated formations. So it's ideal from a company standpoint to have existing producing assets, developmental drilling opportunity that are very low risk, but have all this tremendous upside.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have positioned, and I've positioned the company under the direction of the board to really, have a low risk revenue generating with incredible upside.
Is you may not be able to speak to this just given the nature of being a public company, but what's your plan and the board's vision for the company? Do you guys see you as becoming one of the premier acreage holders of helium and, selling to, just throw out a Pioneer Natural Resources that's looking to maybe diversify their business in the natural resource? Do you guys, how do y'all think about that in just terms of positioning in the market and the future of the company?
Um, there are a lot of small E&P companies that are, looking for helium. They have acreage blocks. They're shooting seismic. They're drilling exploratory wells.
Mm-hmm.
The way I look at that, Colin, is they're kind of on the outside looking in. What we have established here with Total Helium, with our production acquisition, not an exploratory project, but a production acquisition with low risk drilling, we're now on the inside. So we are, from a junior oil and gas standpoint, we are either the only or one of a few that is actually producing helium.
Yeah.
And so it puts us in a league of our own.
Yeah.
Now that we have current production and we have this robust drilling program of low risk drilling with the great upside.
Why do you think oil and gas companies haven't attacked that resource harder? I mean, they have the skill set, the engineering knowledge, the capital. What's kept any of these bigger companies, larger independents, from exploring that?
So it's always a discussion topic, and there will be more advancement to other oil and gas companies getting into the helium business. We are fortunate that we are one of the first movers.
Yeah.
In acquiring lands and developing these. You go explore for helium where there is helium. And when I first heard someone say the Holbrook Basin is the Saudi Arabia of helium, I thought that's kind of cheesy statement. But then I thought it's so true. I met, there was a helium conference in Denver a little over a month ago with scientists literally from all over the world. And I queried one of them, Chris Ballantyne, who's a Oxford geochemist, who has looked for helium his whole life. And he did his undergrad work in the Hugoton Basin. And I've known Chris for a really long time. I asked him, what's the highest helium concentration in the world? He said, well, there was one that had like 20%, which was one well that was just anomalous.
Yeah.
But he said the Holbrook Basin is literally some of the highest helium concentrations in the world. And so you go there. Now let me share a little bit about ExxonMobil.
Okay.
ExxonMobil is a large producer of helium. And again, back to your comment about a byproduct, they have one of the most incredible fields I've seen in my life. It's called the LaBarge Field in Wyoming.
Okay.
These wells will produce 20,000 or 20 million to 50 million. They're just hog wells. This field has produced 7 TCF in the last 20 years.
Wow.
At 0.5% helium. And so the wells are flat. The only reason it's not producing more and they're not drilling more is their $2 billion processing plant can't handle anymore.
Yeah.
And so they are part of the helium business. But again, it's a byproduct of helium.
Yeah.
And so we are focusing on those assets that have a higher percentage, really good paybacks, and inexpensive drilling.
Yeah. No, it's the reason I asked that question is because I think that there's opportunity in many different areas of business, and sometimes it just takes like a different mindset to say, hey, we're going to be a helium
Yes.
EMP, and that's what we're going to focus on. Well, it's a byproduct for other producers. It's going to be our main product. And, having an open mind and taking a look at a field in Arizona where that might scare other producers from like, hey, we're not going to go sink money into that, especially if it's not our core product. So that's why I asked that question, just because I think that's interesting how y'all identified opportunity and pursued it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there will be other companies possibly coming to the helium. What we're doing at Total Helium is we're one of the first movers to be one of these small junior companies that are currently producing.
Well, now after this
helium.
podcast, I mean, the cat's out of the bag. So yeah, you can have a lot of competitors.
No, this is super fascinating stuff. I think that, I'm going to take some stuff away from it and chew on it, especially around supply chain and manufacturing in the United States and the role that helium plays in that. And so if anyone wants to find you, Robert, or do you guys have a website, or are you on LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Where can they find you?
All the above. It's totalhelium.com.
Cool.
And I'm just so delighted to be here on Wednesday. We just closed on this acquisition on Monday.
Yeah.
And again, we'll have with the 2, 5, 6, we'll have 10 to 15 wells. We'll have another 10 wells the next 3 months too. And we're just getting after it.
Yeah.
We're making money. Robert's
riding on the high of closing the deal, and he's ready to go poke some holes in the ground and make some helium. We'll have to get out there sometime and come shoot some video content and tell the story of producing helium in Arizona, because I think that's a pretty cool story to tell. So if y'all are listening to this podcast and you're interested in helium, you're interested in going or working for Robert, you're interested in investing, whatever it may be, give him a shout. We'll put a link to his LinkedIn in the show notes, and we will link to the website. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, which I know I enjoyed this one, share it with a friend, share it on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, all the social media platforms. Always appreciate y'all sharing the show. Robert, thanks for coming on today, man.
Thanks for what you guys are doing. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll catch you guys next week.